Long before any foreign flags ever touched our shores, Africa was already on the rise, building magnificent empires, mastering the complexities of science, shaping vast trade networks, and deeply honoring the wisdom and legacy of its ancestors. From the earliest days, Africa was a cradle of humanity, a place where cultures and civilizations flourished long before the rest of the world took notice. In the early history of Africa, sophisticated kingdoms and empires arose, each with its distinct identity, but all contributing richly to the continent's heritage. For example, the ancient Egyptians constructed elaborate monuments and developed complex writing systems, astronomy, and mathematics. They built an enduring civilization that influenced the Mediterranean and beyond. Africa's development followed a unique trajectory that was fundamentally different from the path taken by Europe, showcasing a distinct character in its evolution. This unique path was characterized by development deeply rooted in the continent's natural environment and landscapes. The progress experienced across the different regions of Africa was intricately tied to the land, with communities often developing sustainable practices that were in harmony with their natural surroundings. Family bonds formed the fabric of societal structure, serving as the cornerstone for communities and influencing various aspects of life, from governance and social organization to economic activities. Spiritual life was another foundational element, deeply ingrained in everyday life and shaping cultural norms, values, and social interactions. African societies were built upon strong communal values, emphasizing shared responsibilities, mutual support, and collective well-being. These values fostered a sense of unity and belonging, guiding the way communities organized themselves and interacted with each other. To claim that Africa's way of development is somehow inferior or lacking is to ignore the vast diversity of human progress and the rich tapestry of cultures and histories that constitute our world. Such a viewpoint dismisses the achievements and contributions of African civilizations, erasing their rich and varied histories simply because they do not mirror the narratives of the colonizers. These colonizers often propagated the idea that Africa had no history or meaningful past as a pretext to justify their exploitation and domination. Despite these efforts to erase and undermine, the ancient ruins and enduring cultural practices continue to testify to Africa's vibrant past. The rhythms of African life, from music and dance to oral traditions and community gatherings, vibrate with resilience, strength, and vitality. Above all, the truth about Africa's rich history and cultural heritage endures, living on in the hearts and memories of its people and in the stories they continue to tell. What was stolen from African communities was never forgotten, etched deeply into the collective memory of generations. This lasting remembrance signifies the profound impact these events had on the social, economic, and cultural fabric of the affected peoples. The arrival of European colonizers marked the genesis of exploitation, a sinister and transformative chapter in history. European powers arrived not as partners in fair trade or as equals seeking mutual respect, but as conquerors wielding the tools of domination and subjugation. They carried with them cartographic instruments, not for geographical exploration, but for the division and appropriation of lands that were already inhabited and cultivated by thriving societies. The flags they planted symbolized claims of sovereignty over territories and peoples, dismissing the existing ownership and governance. The chains they brought were literal and metaphorical, enslaving bodies and minds alike. Beneath every guise of diplomacy or trade agreements, there lay a treacherous undercurrent of deceit and violence. The phrase "friendly handshake" is, therefore, a bitter irony, as these gestures often mask the looming threat of aggression and betrayal that would soon follow. Europe's landing on African shores was not the dawn of a new era of mutual benefit or shared growth. To the contrary, it signaled the commencement of a relentless era of plunder, the devastation of cultures, the extraction of wealth, and the imposition of foreign rule. The so-called Age of Discovery was, from Africa's perspective, an age marked by invasion, exploitation, and profound loss, a loss of autonomy, lives, resources, and heritage. The Portuguese, Dutch, French, and British, along with other European colonial powers, arrived in Africa with a dual arsenal. Alongside goods meant to facilitate trade, they brought weapons to enforce their dominion through military might. Their approach demonstrated a willingness to use violence and coercion as primary tools to achieve their objectives, fundamentally altering the course of African history and setting the stage for centuries of struggle against colonial oppression. The impact on her was profound, leaving wounds that ran deep and could never heal. The systems that were imposed upon her lands were intricate, labyrinthine networks designed with ruthless efficiency, aimed at mercilessly extracting both the labor of the people and the natural wealth of the continent. These systems were relentless, splintering societies into fragmented pieces, causing immense damage not just to the physical landscapes, but to the very essence of communities. Rich tapestries of history, traditions, and cultures were shredded, as if those stories had never existed, erasing the identity and achievements of entire civilizations. The seeds of dependency were sown deep, ensuring that control and domination would remain firmly in the hands of the few, with wealth flowing exclusively outward, away from Africa and into the coffers of colonial powers and external entities. This was not just a theft of material wealth, but of potential, of the very future that could have been crafted by the hands and minds of its own people. In this context, to truly understand the roots of Africa's modern struggles, one must look back to the very origins of this exploitation, to the pivotal intersection where hope for partnerships based on equality and mutual respect was abandoned, and the path of ruthless conquest was chosen instead. What was taken extends beyond tangible assets. Futures filled with potential were stripped away. Trust that had been extended in goodwill was violently betrayed, and the very fabric of time was torn, robbing generations of what could have been a brighter, self-determined future. This legacy of loss and betrayal underpins many of the challenges that contemporary Africa faces today. Traditions that spanned generations, acting as the bedrock of ancient cultures and identities, were torn asunder with brutal efficiency. The systematic erasure of these customs was not just a matter of cultural loss. It meant the destruction of vital connections to history, identity, and meaning. When people were ripped from their homelands, often through violent raids or coercive trickery, they were reduced not just to the status of slaves, but to mere property, devoid of personhood. This objectification allowed them to be bartered like goods, traded for commodities such as sugar, cotton, and guns that fed the world's appetite for these goods. But the impact of this atrocity was far more profound than economic exploitation. The spiritual devastation sank deep into the human psyche. The abducted were not only cut off from their lands, but also from the very beliefs, rituals, and wisdom that gave their lives meaning. The cruel conversion of humans into chattel was designed to erode not just the bodies of those enslaved, but to break their spirits, to rob them of hope and extinguish any memory of freedom. The system's reach extended into the realms of religion, law, and pseudoscience, each reinforcing the monstrous doctrine that Africans were inherently inferior. Entire doctrines were constructed to portray Africans as less than human, a grotesque justification that sought to legitimize the inhuman conditions aboard slave ships and the relentless suffering on the plantations. This vast dehumanization was not confined to a single location, but was a global phenomenon. Africans were commodified in the world market, and their identity was rewritten to be synonymous with servitude and subjugation. This new imposed identity sought to erase the rich cultural heritage of Blackness, leaving a legacy of trauma that echoes through history. Still, we remember. The echoes of our ancestors' voices resonate within us, a reminder of the struggles and the victories. Still, we resist, pushing back against the currents that aim to sweep us away. We were never meant to survive the relentless forces aimed at erasing us, the systematic dismantling of our cultures, our histories, and our identities. But we persevered, and we will continue to endure, steadfast in our determination to thrive. The ravages of colonialism left a deep scar across African societies. The deliberate rewriting of African histories sought to shape a false narrative, one that diminished our achievements and suppressed our voices. They conquered the land itself, claiming it piece by piece, dissecting territories and communities with arbitrary borders. But to truly rule the people, they had to conquer the mind, reshaping identities and beliefs to fit a colonial mold. Colonialism was not merely about drawing borders or installing new governments. It was about controlling how people saw themselves and their place in the world. This psychological colonization sought to rob us of our heritage, making us strangers in our own land. But through resistance and resilience, we reclaim our identities, our stories, and our rightful place in history. And we will continue this fight, enduring and rising above the challenges we face. In contemporary times, it remains a remarkable, yet troubling reality that many Africans possess a greater familiarity with the capitals of European nations than with the ancient, historical cities that are part of their own continent's rich tapestry. This phenomenon is not simply a matter of geographical knowledge. It is a symptom of a larger issue regarding the recognition and valuation of Africa's own historical and cultural heritage. The endeavor to reclaim our history is far more significant than simply yearning for the past or indulging in sentimental reminiscing. It represents a profound act of resistance against the forces that have historically sought to erase, distort, or co-opt our narrative. It is a declaration that we refuse to allow others to define our story, knowing that when they do, it often comes without the love, respect, or accuracy it deserves. Throughout history, there have been deliberate and systemic efforts to obscure, devalue, or completely obliterate facets of African history and identity. Colonial powers and other external influences have often propagated narratives that served their interests, frequently at the authenticity and integrity of African culture. Despite these attempts to manipulate or suppress our history, there is a growing movement committed to uncovering and reinstating the truth. Each time we revive the memory of an ancient city, celebrate a forgotten hero, or retell a story that has been buried, we are performing an act of revolution. We are not merely recalling history. We are actively reclaiming it and asserting our right to define our identity, free from external distortions. This process empowers us to unlock the full spectrum of our heritage, and in doing so, we uncover a deeper understanding of our power and identity. It is through this intimate knowledge of our past that we can fully embrace who we are and where we come from, ensuring that our story is told with the dignity and honor it rightfully deserves. Though European countries officially granted political independence to their African colonies, the aftermath was not the full liberation that many had hoped for. Despite gaining sovereignty and the emergence of new national governments, these countries found themselves still entwined in the complex web of economic and psychological influences left behind by the colonial powers. These influences continued to hinder genuine independence by maintaining a form of indirect control and influence. Economic freedom proved difficult to achieve, as African economies were still structured around the export of raw materials. The legacy of colonial rule had left African nations with economies focused heavily on agriculture and mining, producing goods that were then processed and sold as finished products by other countries. This dependency created economic vulnerabilities and stifled the growth of local industries. Psychological liberation was another area where independence was lacking. The historical narrative propagated by colonial powers often depicted Africans as inferior and incapable of self-governance, a notion that left lasting scars. These perceptions could undermine confidence and hinder the self-determination of African nations. Moreover, the departure of colonial administrators did not mean the end of foreign interference. The new chains were more subtle but equally effective. Foreign aid, instead of fostering self-reliance, often came with strings attached, which could limit the policy choices of African governments and perpetuate dependency. Additionally, multinational corporations continued to play a dominant role in exploiting Africa's natural resources. They often dictated the terms of engagement, and as a result, the wealth generated from these resources rarely benefited the local populations in any significant way. Thus, while the physical presence of European rulers may have diminished, the structures they put in place and the new systems of economic and psychological influence ensured that many African nations remained under the shadow of their colonial past. Though the individuals playing key roles may have changed over time, stepping into the positions once occupied by their predecessors, the script, the underlying system that dictates actions and outcomes, has remained steadfast and unchanged. This continuity suggests that while there have been victories, such as the ones over symbolic issues like national flags, the broader and more meaningful struggle for authentic freedom remains unfinished. The chains that still hold back true freedom have evolved. No longer as visible as the chains of physical slavery or colonial dominance, these modern bonds are much more insidious, embedded deeply within the fabric of our economies, present in education systems, and even influencing the aspirations and dreams of individuals. These are the chains of economic dependency, cultural manipulation, and psychological subjugation. Gaining real independence is not an automatic process, nor a gift that's granted easily. It requires the concerted efforts of those who seek it, driven by a relentless dedication to dismantling the myriad forms of subtle oppression that still exist. The notion of freedom loses its true meaning if it only represents the outward appearance of liberty while the inner core remains constrained and exploited. Consider, for example, symbols like national flags, which may proudly wave in the wind. But what use are these symbols if the country they represent is not truly self-determined? If the nation's destiny is being dismantled and sold off in fragments, what does that flag's freedom truly represent? This dilemma encapsulates the ongoing narrative of Africa's incomplete journey toward true liberation. Across the globe, in both the smallest hamlets nestled in the countryside and the bustling metropolises teeming with life, individuals are taking a stand to shape their futures. In countless communities, they are the architects of change, crafting resilient economies that flourish from the grassroots level. These pioneers are not merely filling gaps, but are constructing new pathways to opportunity, often in places where hope had been a scarce commodity. They uncover and broadcast narratives that had for too long been silenced, giving a platform to the marginalized and those whose experiences had been overlooked or dismissed. These changemakers are unwavering in their quest for justice, displaying remarkable fortitude and courage in the face of adversity. The essence of liberation is not enshrined in grandiloquent speeches or in the hollow promises of rhetoric. Instead, it finds its home in the relentless pursuit of a better world, in the quiet yet powerful acts of defiance and resilience that occur each day. Liberation is not immortalized in the lifelessness of statues or monuments, but it vibrates with energy in the living, breathing movements of ordinary people who rise up and demand a transformation in their societies. True liberation is alive and dynamic, flourishing wherever people refuse to accept the status quo and work tirelessly for equity and dignity. Will this generation step forward to reclaim the promise that has long been deferred? This is a question that resonates deeply across the African continent, where the journey towards development and prosperity has often been hindered by a complex web of historical, social, and economic challenges. The promise of a bright future, characterized by peace, stability, and prosperity, has been deferred for too long. This generation, standing at the crossroads of tradition and modernity, has the unique opportunity to challenge the status quo. With access to unprecedented levels of information and technology, they can draw lessons from the past while charting a course that reflects the continent's rich cultural heritage and diverse identities. Will Africa rise up, not to imitate the West, but to forge its own unique path and identity? This question invites a reflection on the importance of self-reliance and innovation. Africa has historically been viewed through the lens of Western development models, which often do not account for the continent's unique contexts and opportunities. By embracing their own strengths and solving problems with homegrown solutions, African nations can carve a path that is distinctly their own. This journey towards self-discovery and empowerment is not without its challenges. It requires visionary leadership, a dedication to education and innovation, and a commitment to fostering unity while celebrating diversity. As the world becomes increasingly interconnected, Africa's role on the global stage will be defined by how it navigates this pivotal moment, whether it chooses the path of imitation or dares to create its own narrative. To lead from her own center with strength and authenticity means to draw upon inner resources of power and truth, without succumbing to external pressures or expectations that might dilute or distort one's true purpose. This journey has often been undermined by forces that have deliberately underdeveloped certain groups, keeping them from realizing their full potential through systemic factors such as inadequate education, economic exploitation, and social injustices. Despite these efforts to subjugate and control, the essence of that marginalized spirit, its culture, identity, and inherent worth, could not be erased. It is this spirit that now rises not just as a reaction to past oppression or as a form of retaliation, but through bold, visionary creation. What this signifies is a new dawn where creativity, innovation, and proactive envisioning of a future by the oppressed themselves takes center stage. Africa's future, in particular, is depicted as a blank canvas, a land ripe with possibilities that require boldness and courage to shape and mold. It calls upon the people of Africa and those in solidarity with them to recognize the unfinished work of liberation and justice and to bring to fruition the dreams of past generations. While full freedom, be it political, economic, or social, has not yet been an increasing and unwavering resolve to claim it. The journey ahead is embraced with a sense of purpose and an understanding that the strength to overcome lies within. The narrative is one of resilience, hope, and a collective awakening to the power to shape destiny. With each step forward, the determination to reach true freedom intensifies. Until we liberate ourselves completely, without doubt or fear, we remain in the shadows of our former selves. We've been conditioned to believe in our own insignificance, lulled into a state of forgetfulness by a narrative that was never ours. They, the architects of this deception, told us we were nothing, devoid of worth and stripped of identity. For a time, we internalized these falsehoods, allowing them to eclipse our vision of ourselves and our capabilities. Yet, within us, a stirring began. Memories resurfaced, whispering of the grandeur of civilizations long gone. These civilizations, rich with wisdom and understanding, laid the foundations of arts, sciences, and governance far more ancient than those acknowledged today. The knowledge they held may have been obscured by time and deliberate concealment, but it was never truly obliterated. These revelations have ignited a reclaiming of dignity and worth. What was taken from us through acts of subjugation, though forcibly removed, was never destroyed. It exists within us, a flame unquenched, awaiting the winds of change to fan it into a blaze. It is this spark of remembrance and renewed purpose that will guide us toward true freedom, not just from the chains imposed by others, but from the doubts and fears that have held us prisoner within our own minds. Africa's underdevelopment was not a mere accident or coincidence. This lack of advancement, compared to other regions, stems from a deeply rooted history of exploitation and colonization. Over centuries, foreign powers systematically extracted wealth and resources, impeding the continent's ability to develop independently. The deliberate structuring of economies to benefit colonial powers, coupled with the imposition of artificial borders and divide-and-conquer tactics, created a legacy of economic and political strife. But just as this suppression was intentional, so too can our rise be a conscious and determined strategy. We are not helpless victims, trapped by the forces of history. Instead, we are the active authors and creators of tomorrow's future. This means that through unity, education, and strategic planning, African nations can foster economic growth, technological innovation, and social progress. By investing in education and infrastructure, empowering local entrepreneurs, and building robust governance structures, we can rewrite the narrative. In order to truly reclaim Africa's future, we must first reclaim her truth. This involves promoting and preserving Africa's rich cultural heritage, which has often been overshadowed or misrepresented. We must embrace her stories, honor her history, and amplify her authentic voice. This means challenging stereotypes, correcting historical inaccuracies, and highlighting the continent's contributions to the global community. Through this reclamation of truth, we can build a future that is equitable, prosperous, and reflective of Africa's true potential. And most notably, her incredible power is unparalleled, a testament to the untapped potential within herself. The series is far from reaching its conclusion. Rather, it heralds the dawn of a new era, rich with opportunities and potential. It's a nascent stage, ripe for those courageous enough to awaken to the realities around them, to embrace the truth in all its raw and vibrant colors. This is a call to action for those prepared to voice their thoughts with conviction, to construct a future rooted in the principles of justice and equity. For the most profound revolution of all lies in the remembrance and reclamation of our authentic selves. They attempted to blot out our existence, to reduce our voices to echoes, and to erase the narrative of our journey. Yet we are the ink, the indelible mark, steadfast and enduring, that defines our story. Thank you sincerely for choosing to invest your precious time with us, to embark on this journey of enlightenment and growth. If this experience has brought you new insights or touched you in a meaningful way, please show your support by giving us a like. Share this with others who might benefit from our message, and subscribe to our channel for more compelling and uplifting stories. Don't forget to hit the notification bell to stay updated and ensure you never miss the next powerful story we share.